we'll get started. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Michael Paarlberg. I am an assistant professor of political science here at VCU, and we're very excited to have this event. It's actually one of two events that we're having here on campus with guests from the State Department's Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations. This is going to be a panel discussion in which we talk about the use of data-driven research to understand, analyze, and hopefully prevent conflict in the world. And we have a mixture of perspectives from us at VCU, from academia, from government, from the State Department's Bureau, and from the advocacy, civil society group. And so we have some great. It's a very kind of varied discussion here. And this is going to feed into the afternoon's event, which we just have a meet and greet, a very casual conversation with students who are interested in working in diplomacy, in international policy, not just in conflict resolution, but this is what I hope to be the start of ongoing conversations and ongoing relationships between VCU and, I would say, just like the international policy world in every way that it appears. So I'll be both presenting a little bit, but also moderating. And we are going to be joined by our distinguished guests. So first of all, speaking is Matthew Steinhelfer, who is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and heads the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations. So he'll be speaking from the perspective of government. And then we also have Elizabeth Hume, who is the Executive Director of the Alliance for Peacebuilding. And are you also a fellow with CSIS? I forget.
No.
Okay. Well, just with
but I work very closely.
Right. But just with the Alliance for Peacebuilding, speaking from a civil society perspective. And then we have us from VCU, Professor Trisko Darden, who I think many of you know and have taken classes with, and myself, and we will just be speaking of our respective research, but also challenges that come up when it comes to researching a topic that is oftentimes the data is not so great, and it's hard to do research, especially field research on these topics. So I hope this will be a fruitful discussion. I will just hand it over to Deputy Assistant Secretary, and why don't you go ahead?
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for that. And thanks everyone for getting up on a Friday morning to come to this. I hope we can make this a little entertaining. I know I have my typical State Department cleared remarks, but I won't be reading from those as a script. But it's absolutely great to be here with Liz, who is part of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, a really important organization to know, especially in this field. With Jessica, with Michael, I think these kind of events are what make our work at the State Department real, because we're not just talking to policy wonks in Washington, but we're actually thinking about, hey, how do we actually relate the work that we're doing to the real world, and that includes you. So really appreciate you being willing to listen to us and hopefully ask some really tough questions. So from my perspective, I've had a really fortunate career at the State Department and worked on 5 continents, traveled to nearly 60 countries, lived in Afghanistan, traveled with the Deputy Secretary of State. I've gotten to do a lot of really great things. And the one thing that I've really concluded at this stage of my career is that the US government has to do better at stress testing our strategies, our policies, and our programs. We still don't have the most effective and best results possible, and we have more work to do. And I think that's important to note. So a lot of the things I'll talk about today is to talk a little bit about the work that I'm trying to do and trying to advance at the State Department and from my bureau to stress test our work, and particularly using data analytics, something that we don't have a culture at State Department of using, to drive better strategies, get better programs, and really what I often say is optimize our results wherever we can. So, we always talk about what's the impetus for a lot of this work. President Biden put out a presidential memorandum saying we need to restore trust in government. And that includes using scientific data, evidence-based policymaking. The State Department pushed out in the last year 2 major policy frameworks. One was our first ever data strategy for the Department of State. We also have a joint strategic plan between State Department and USAID, which elevated a lot of this work that we're going to use data analytics. Great. So we said we're going to do it. How are we going to do it? And I think that's the hardest thing for any strategy, it's the implementation. And so what we're doing now is looking at these documents and seeing what's the roadmap to try to implement these, to advance infrastructure that we need, software, the training, the culture that we need at the department to address a lot of these aspects. Now, I won't go through a lot of that, sort of boring bureaucratic stuff, but I want to talk a little bit about some of the real world examples that how we're using data in the State Department to try to change the dynamic. So the first thing to flag for you is that several years ago, my bureau, the Conflict and Stabilization Operations Bureau, they foresaw the need for global data sets that were regularly updated, that were public, that everyone can access, no matter you're in the United States or at the UN or at a local organization in a country like Haiti. And as a result, we produced this data set in partnership with a group called the Armed Conflict Location and Events Data Project, or ACLID. And this is now global, it's online, you can look it up, acliddata.com. It's cited by thousands of journalists, by organizations, by the intelligence community. So it's a highly verified weekly data set on armed conflict events and other conflict events. Now, what we're using it for is to help us look around the curve. How can we do a better job within the US government, particularly within the State Department, at forecasting risks to violence when elections occur around the world? Where can we look at or anticipate increases of civilian killings, which helps us address some of our atrocity prevention work? Or where can we anticipate larger interstate conflict around the world? And we're doing a lot of these things. I wasn't able to bring some of those unclassified products today, but hopefully if you're interested in a career in State Department or an internship, you'll be able to join my bureau and we'll be able to work on some of that together. The next thing that we started working on in this field is creating a multi-donor trust fund. And this is incredibly difficult. We're working right now with the German government on a thing called the Complex Risk and Analysis Fund, which will be housed at the UN. It's part of the UN Secretary General's data initiative. And the idea is that if not just the US government has better unclassified data, but what if the international community had better unclassified data on conflict or complex events around the world? What would that do? Well, it would allow us to have a common operating picture. We'd be able to talk to each other and understand what's going on in events around the world faster. So that way we can do more forecasting and we can actually jump to action faster than we ever have before. And so I think that's another initiative that's kind of nascent, but something that we're working on. Another area to highlight is some of our work on armed actors around the world. In order to have better strategies, we need to think through in the US government some of the second or third order effects of our actions, our interventions. So, what unexpected causes of an intervention can we assess in advance and then mitigate? And we're beginning to build analytical models to not just network map the interactions between armed groups, militias, criminal organizations, other violent groups, not just to understand their linkages, but also to think about the ecosystem that they exist. How are they involved in corruption? How do they engage socio-political, economic actors? Because we have to think through the complex network of these various groups. So through advanced analytics, we can identify power brokers, we can identify weak points in the network, which will allow us to anticipate a lot of our actions. So what if we can inject what if scenarios into the data? Like, what if we decided to sanction this actor? What would that do or not do? Or how would the network change? Or how would it impact certain political actors? And this is the kind of data that we believe that senior level decision makers need. My boss's boss's boss needs. So finally, I think that the topic that's on a lot of people's mind is Ukraine. And I thought it was really important to flag some of the work that we're doing there now. We were involved in Ukraine before Russia's unprovoked and brutal invasion. And we're continuing to find ways to ratchet up the pressure on Putin for this unjustified and premeditated war. And the devastation that Russia has brought to Ukraine, particularly as you saw in the news recently in Mariupol, is just staggering. It's heart-wrenching. Just some data points. The number of casualties a month ago in Mariupol alone was reported to be 2,400 civilians. Maternity hospitals and buildings marked as children's shelters were rocketed by the Russian government. And that was before a lot of the horrific images that we saw that were apparent atrocities committed by members of the Kremlin forces in Bucha. And it's been a month since a lot of those statistics or information has been published. So what are we doing? We, as part of the president, when President Biden was in Warsaw, there was a major announcement of additional support for Ukraine. Yesterday, there was an additional announcement of $1.3 billion of additional assistance. For our part in CSO, we're looking at how can we shine a light on Russian atrocities. We are establishing, it was in the president's announcement, we're establishing a conflict observatory. And what we're doing is we're going to gather information that will be shared with a range of accountability mechanisms on the international stage and the national level, working with the Ukrainian government to hold Russia accountable. And how we're doing that is we're going to use technology such as commercial satellite imagery to identify pre, during, and post attack, to document with legal standards, the Berkeley protocols, for example, in order to bring or to assist the government of Ukraine and civil society organizations in monitoring and documenting these instances of human rights abuses. In other contexts, we're doing similar things, looking at village monitoring for burning incidents in other countries in Africa, to provide better early warning systems for villages that may be attacked. And it's using this kind of data analytics, advanced technology that's commercially available, but requires additional US government support for licensing, is where I see a lot of our work can not just help us look around the curve, but also do a better job at responding or advancing our policy. So one kind of final note, why I really believe, we were talking earlier, why I came to this bureau, why I believe in it. I think it's needed, and I think especially with the data analytics piece, it's so important because again, we don't do this work. Last year, Secretary Blinken was the first Secretary of State that rolled out our annual report on to Congress on the Elie Wiesel Atrocities and Genocide Prevention Act. And one of the things at that event that he said really, I think, seemed appropriate for today. So if you allow me, just one quick quote from him, which was, quote, "We want to change the story that we've seen play out too many times. By the time senior policymakers are fully engaged, many people have died, the costs of taking action have risen, and opportunities for early intervention have been missed." End quote. So this work that we're doing, we're talking about, is more than theory. It's life-saving. We must move out of reaction mode in the US government and into prevention mode. I know Liz believes in this, that's her work, her life's work. And I believe for our part, this is why I believe that the work we're doing in my bureau is so important, that we're using this data to forecast, be ahead of the curve, anticipate conflict. And if we don't do that, we will miss out on key opportunities to mitigate or avert more future conflict. And to do all this, our work has to be optimized. We have to optimize our strategies, think ahead of consequences, mitigate those consequences, and achieve the best results as a result. So if we do this in closing, I'm certain, and this is why, despite the frustrations of government bureaucracy and so forth, I'm absolutely certain that if we do this work, we can save more lives, more conflicts can be resolved, and US national security can be stronger. So thanks again for allowing me to participate in this and having me, and thanks again, Liz and Jessica for also joining this conversation. Thanks.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much, Matt. Really exciting. I think it's an exciting time to hear about this because I feel like we're on a new frontier. The data is, you hear the phrase "data is the new oil," which new gold or whatever. And a lot of times we hear about the use of data for maybe pernicious or maybe benign reason, selling you stuff on Instagram. But like it can be used. We hope it can be used to not just, as one philosopher said, not just analyze the world, but to change it, to prevent things from happening that I think data can give us patterns that can help us point us in that direction. So I think that would be a good segue. Maybe Liz, would you be willing to go next
Sure.
to talk about the practice side of this, what it means to work in civil society and actually try to prevent conflict?
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I'm not talking too much because I could talk about this all day. It is really my passion. I started off, I'm a lawyer by background, and I started off being seconded by the State Department to the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, in Bosnia, right after the war. And I was there writing laws because there were none, and we were trying to implement the data peace accords. I then went to Kosovo 3 years later, doing the same thing. I then went to Afghanistan, working for the International Rescue Committee, working on protection, human rights issues. And what were we doing? We were coming to a conflict after the fact. Once a country has had conflict, within 10 years, it's statistically more likely that it will go back to conflict. And here in the United States, we don't really see it's something that happens over there. And in some regard, today in the US, one of the silver linings of the conflict and violence that is happening here in the US is we're starting to understand it and what it means. So that it's not just something that's over there. It's something that we can actually understand here, even with what happened with the global pandemic. The United States, we now know through data that social cohesion, countries that did better under COVID-19 because they had trust in government and good social cohesion, trust. The United States, according to the Fragile States Index, through the Fund for Peace, has the worsening social cohesion indicators in the world. What does that say? The United States did really bad on COVID-19. We got lucky because of that vaccine. But for that fact, we were off the charts. So that's what data can tell you. So what does that mean? It means programming in COVID-19, it's not just about vaccines, it's not just about science. We need to be looking at trust in communities, trust in government, and be programming for social cohesion. If we want to get out of the COVID-19 pandemic, and if we want to get out of the next pandemic, that my husband, who's an epidemiologist, says, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So that's just an important point to think. And again, nobody wants to see anything horrible happen like the pandemic. But if there's something we take out of it, it's an opportunity that here in the United States, we can actually understand what that means for other conflict affected and fragile states. So let me just start off by telling you a story about Ethiopia and how how badly we've done in terms of data, but also it's getting better. And that's really important because our research that we just put out with a couple of our members on narratives is that if I start by talking about all the bad things, what's happening in your brain right now is you're shutting down and going, well, what's the point? There's no point if we can't. So I hope that you remember anything, you remember this story. But I'm going to really try to focus in on what's good instead of just what are all the problems are. And it's hard to do. So I'm actually trying to apply our research. So I just wanted to let you know that it is so hard because we just want to go to like, well, I'll tell you what all the problems are, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end, it's like, oh, there's like a couple of things here and you're all like overwhelmed. So just to let you know, it seems easy to do it, but it's actually really hard. So that's what I'm trying to do here. Okay, so I get to Ethiopia. I actually helped start up when I came back from Afghanistan. I helped start up the Office of Conflict Management and Mitigation at USAID because we just were coming to the conflict after the fact. Over 60 of US government aid missions were operating in countries that were sliding into conflict, in conflict, out of conflict. And we're like, here's our education program, here's our health program, here's our livelihoods program. Wait, things aren't getting better? That's weird. So that was the mission of that office. And the CSO Bureau, which was SCRS at the time, started up around the same time at state, and we were working together. So we put together conflict analytics to go out and do an assessment and understand grievances, what's driving a conflict, the resiliency, both good and bad, because there's things that are going to stop a conflict that might not be good, like an authoritarian government, right? That's not a positive peace indicator. The trends, the triggers, needs and opportunities, and that goes back to Ethiopia. So after I left USAID, I went to Ethiopia to help start a conflict governance program. At the time, Ethiopia was sitting at about 19 on the conflict watch list, again, the Fragile States Index. And we were looking at, what was, where conflict was happening. It was really hard because the government was putting a civil society law, cracking down on civil society, saying you shouldn't be even working on the issues that I was working on. There was a USAID and State Department DRL funded program. And one of the areas we were working with at universities, because university was experiencing so much conflict. Yeah, I'll get these statistics wrong a little bit, but you have about, let's say 60% were Amhara, 40%, well, that would make 100%. So I'm obviously not a math major. So 40%, let's say 40% were Amhara, 40% were Oromia, 10% were Tigrayan. Okay, so what the Ethiopian government would do is take this percentage of population that were living separately and then put them all together in a university somewhere, let's say in a region in Amhara. Well, what do you think happened? Bad conflict happened, and not just like conflict. I mean, all out conflict, people's heads getting smashed in. It would spill out into the community, because remember now the Oromas are like, wait, these people, people would call their friends in other universities, it would spread, a massive triggering of conflict, violent conflict that had an impact on all of Ethiopia. So we were funded by the State Department to do this program in universities. And we started them up, and we had to get it 1, we got into 2, we got into 3, and by the end, we were in all 21 federal universities, running this conflict program, like setting up these conflict clubs, and working on bringing people in to talk about conflict resolution. And what we knew is conflict was going down in these universities, conflict was going down in the communities. But you know what? We didn't have any data. Why? We didn't do a baseline of what conflict was out there. We didn't do any kind of key informant interviews where we talk about people's perceptions. None of that. So I had all this great anecdotal evidence, but I couldn't use it. And one of the things that also happened at the time is remember, it's at a time where, we were coming out of the 90s, everybody was really excited, the Cold War fell, it's all gonna be peace and prosperity. Conflict is ticking up globally, terror and violent extremism. So what do? We then, we couldn't do anything. But you know what we did do? We met our grant requirements. We said how many trainings there were. We said, the curriculum we put together. So what State Department was requiring of us, these outputs, we did. We did everything we said we were supposed to do, but there was no outcome. Like, well, did we reduce conflict? Did it stay the same? Did it have any impact scaling up? And so that's when I came back to Washington in 2012 and said, this has just got to change. This is crazy. And started talking about if we have to prove, if we want funding for this, donors have to require it, they have to fund it, and the implementing partners, many of which are members of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, we're actually a member-based network organization made up of over 160 organizations, and ACLA that you talked about is one of them. So, and that's our role, is to build the field. So if I go up on the Hill and advocate for more funding, they're like, well, prove it. I don't, why are you coming to us with this? And under the Obama administration, we did horrible as a field. And partly because it was like, if you can't prove it, why should I be funding this? We're going to be funding health. Health did really well under the Obama administration. So that's a really important story. Now, there's reasons for why it also happens. So one, how do we know that we prevented conflict? That's something I hear all the time. Well, Mercy Corps, one of our members, did a phenomenal job. In Ethiopia, again, at the time, in about 2012, they were working in this region and they were working on peace building, conflict prevention. And it just so happened that a drought came through the whole area. And in the communities that they were working in, there was no conflict. But in the communities that they hadn't been working in, there was incredible conflict because they didn't know how, the drought was coming through. So that's an example. And that report came out in about 2012 from Conflict to Coping, is a really big milestone for our field. Because for once we're saying we can actually prove that we prevented conflict. But there's a lot of pushback, even from implementing partners. Mercy Corps put a lot of their own money into that report. One of the problems is the peace building field, it's out of funding. Even when our own analysis of US government's conflict assessment frameworks say, this is what's driving conflict in Bangladesh, corruption, and then you look at what's being funded, health, education, and all those indicators are going up. But what's also going up is violence and conflict. So that's a really big part. I mean, these are some of the problems. Again, I said I wasn't supposed to do that, but I am. And I think one of the other issues is the fact that, we aren't working in just countries that malaria, for example. If you're just dealing with malaria and, you're working on that, you're reducing numbers, everybody's happy. We're also working in countries that are conflict affected and fragile. And you're working with governments that a lot of times want to keep it that way, or don't want to say that there's conflict there. When I was working at USAID, we put out a conflict watch list. It was the first time we put it out. Ethiopia was number 19 on the list, going back to about 2004. Next thing I know, the administrator Natsios came down to our office and was like, I just got a call from the Ethiopian ambassador and he's mad because we're calling the US government is calling Ethiopia fragile. Then we had to make that list sensitive but unclassified, couldn't release it. And it goes back to what you were saying, then what's the point of this data? So just a couple more points. So not only are we not from a programmatic doing a great job, but then at this 30,000 foot, are we solving conflict? Are we not? Are things staying the same? Are things getting better? Are things getting worse? We don't know. And I'm not hurt that you didn't talk about the Global Fragility Act, but the Global Fragility Act that got passed in 2019, Mercy Corps and AFP have been developing that law with Congress, pushing it forward. It got adopted bipartisan in 2019 and signed into law. And one of the biggest points in there is data. We have to do better on measuring it, understanding it, and then more importantly, when we see that something's going wrong, do something crazy and change, stop it. Because that's also another problem. We also come with incomplete data. It's like, oh, this is a great idea. You know, my old office, after I left, put out theories of change. If we do this, then this will happen. Guess what? There's no data backing that up. More importantly, some of them I'm like, I actually think we have data that this doesn't work. Why are we doing this? So what is AFP also doing about that right now? We are putting together standards. These are the standards that our field should be doing. Literature review, baseline, you know. Now, there's a lot of our members that don't want to do that and have said, who are you guys to put out standards? Well, we're the Alliance for Peacebuilding, and we are a membership-based organization. We put together an Irene database that pulls in all the indicators that people are using. Now, we haven't gone so far to say, well, these are good, these aren't, but at least pulling them together in one place. So really putting together these standards are key and holding our own members responsible. Now, that sounds crazy, right? Because we're asking people to regulate and do more, both the donors and our own organizations. But I say this all the time, if we can't prove it, our field will never grow and will never increase. And why is that so hard? Why is that so important? Because we're before Ukraine. We are at a 30-year high of global climate conflict. We have more people needing protection and refugees, people displaced than before World War II. 80 million, more than 80 million. The number keeps just going up. So it tells us what we're doing. And we're also dealing with so many new things like dis and misinformation. And that's a lot of work and great data that's coming out of Ukraine. So I'm going to stop there. But I just want to, you know, and I hope we have a really big discussion in terms of, you know, holding us also accountable and your ideas. But it's important to understand that we haven't gotten this right yet. And, you know, I feel like we're handing this world over to you. And the, you know, data is so critical to this. But the good news is we held an event at AFP and your boss was there, Ann Mikowski, and Rob Jenkins from USA. And the majority of questions were metrics. People were like, can we talk about metrics? I want to talk about how we're going to do this. And I can tell you 5 years ago, you know, I'd be like, it'd be an event at Brookings. I'm like, all right, here I'm going to go again, talking about data and how much we need it. They're like, oh, there's Liz, crazy Liz talking about data. I almost cried because it's becoming the norm now and people are demanding it. So I'll stop there, but.
Well, that's a great way to end. That's a very hopeful, hopeful trend. I hope that more policymakers and members of the general public, you know, demand higher standards, I guess, for making causal arguments. Yes. Jess, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Okay. I'm gonna give you some examples, visual examples of the type of data that my colleagues have been speaking about. But first, I have to log into this. So my name is Trisko Darden. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science, where I teach courses on women in global politics, but also the politics of genocide, where I deal with things like civilian casualties and atrocity prevention, and understanding these phenomena in historical context. Like my colleague Liz Hume here, I've done field work in Bosnia and Kosovo and East Timor, but a few decades after the fact, most recently in 2019 in Bosnia, Albania, and Kosovo. But today I'm actually going to talk about other people's work because I wanted to give you examples of the type of work being done in this field, why it's so important, and then some of the questions we need to ask of that data. So first I'm going to present to you RAND Corporation Sinjar Detention Facilities Analysis. So you can Google this, you can pull up a beautiful RAND report, you can pull up some blog posts associated with it. So I'm not going to run through the whole project, but this was something that was funded through the RAND Corporation's own research unit. As Liz noted, many NGOs and other organizations hold some of their funding to kind of do this important work. It was considered too sensitive for the US government to kind of fund, and so RAND took it up independently. So this is a map of known detention facilities in Xinjiang province. For those of you who are not familiar with this is a predominantly Muslim and ethnic minority region of China. This map was produced by researchers in Australia who have been tracking the expansion of China's human rights abuses in Xinjiang province, most notably the forceful detention and re-education of the Uyghur minority population. As you'll see here, they divided these centers or camps into 4 different tiers based on the level of security. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we know where these places are, how we know how to rank them, and what that means for our understanding of ongoing human rights abuses in the People's Republic of China. So we spoke earlier about satellite data and the importance of satellite data in tracking human rights abuses. Right now in Ukraine, reports indicate that mass graves have been dug outside the town of Mariupol. We also know that satellite data has been used to trace mass graves in the Syrian Arab Republic, in Libya, and many other conflict environments. And so this is an example, I hope you can see it, of what this data is used for. So the image on your left, dated April 2014, shows, a semi-urban region, something that looks like a kind of high school racetrack to that effect. And then the picture on your right, dated September 2018, shows the development of what has been labeled here a re-education center. So a camp in which Chinese citizens have been forced to live and are confined. And you can see very clearly the boxed outline is a gated fenced wall with a security perimeter would be a better way to describe it, and an assortment of buildings. So with the satellite technology that the Bureau is now integrating into its own research, researchers have been tracking the expansion of these detention facilities throughout Xinjiang. What they've also done is try to identify the purposes of these various buildings. So you can read more about it in the RAND report. Some of these buildings are schools, some of these are dormitories, some of these are factories where China is engaging in forced labor practices. What's really interesting is that this RAND study says, okay, it's not just buildings. Like we can see the buildings, we can see how many buildings are being added over time. We're also going to look at nighttime satellite photography to examine the expansion of lighting in these areas over time. So why do you think that would be important? Why would we want to know what areas were illuminated, lit up at night? Yes?
Like possibly like searchlights to see if anyone was coming out.
Absolutely, right? So they're an indicator of the level of security of the facility. That's spot on, right? They want to be able to see if people are moving at night, to track and capture anyone who escapes from the facility. So the graph on the bottom half of the image here shows nighttime lighting measured over time. And we see this really big spike between July 2018 and July 2019, where we see kind of a massive expansion of lighting in this particular facility. And what this RAND report argues is that this shows that there was a massive kind of security buildup during this period, and actually it's been declining somewhat since that time. It also can indicate that there were security disruptions within the facility during that period, right? That people were trying to escape, and they had to respond with increased lighting and increased monitoring and things like that. Okay. So this actually tells us a lot of interesting things about what China has been doing in Xinjiang, but it also leaves some things out, right? What does this type of approach leave out in the story of human rights abuses in Xinjiang? Do you have any ideas? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it doesn't actually address like any of the narratives or like individual beliefs of anyone that's either administrating these actions or that's affected by them.
Absolutely. So it doesn't answer the why question, right? It doesn't tell us why specific into these camps, right? And it doesn't help us answer the question of why the Chinese government is doing this, right? Absolutely. What else? You're on a roll, so you may as well keep going. This is great. No pressure. Yeah, go ahead.
And also like specifically in like the re-education centers, we're not actually learning what they're doing to re-educate or trying to facilitate some sort of religious change or community development.
Absolutely. So it can't speak to the content of what's going on, right? It can't tell us what's going on inside these buildings, right? It can't tell us about the living conditions of individuals within these buildings. It can't tell us about the indoctrination that's happening in the schools. It can't tell us about the forced labor practices, right? All of what we call these qualitative details of what's going inside the camps. Absolutely. Any other thoughts, questions about this?
The obvious question to me is how do you even know the education centers?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very important question, right? And that's why this is very sensitive research, because essentially the researchers are positing that this is what these are, right? And the Chinese government can contest that narrative. So we go back to competing narratives and how this is increasingly integral to our understanding of conflict. The researchers in Australia who produced this map have essentially argued that we see enough systematic similarity between these sites to say that they're the same thing, right? So if we were to drive around Virginia, we could pick out a building and say that's probably a school, even if it didn't have a sign, because there's similarity in structure and design. But there are probably other buildings, historic buildings, that we might miss out and not call a school, even if they were one, right? So we have to be sensitive to that sort of variation. But that's an important question. And from the Chinese government position, right, these are not detention facilities, right? And so there's a lot in the narrative there. And that's why, for instance, you get them labeled in this report as re-education centers. Because even using the word camp, people will use that colloquially in their presentations. You will see it very rarely in writing because of the kind of value-laden connotation and the association with Konzentrationen lagers and World War II. Okay, so awesome. Like you're thinking analytically, you're looking at this data, you're asking questions, you're seeing its value, you're also seeing its challenges. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think it's like when we look at what's going on in Ukraine, and we see like a hospital being bombed or like a school being bombed, we're very easily being able to see like the target population is like that group of people, which increases the response of like people in the United States. But with the re-education centers, we don't have necessarily statistics on what population, what demographics are being put into these camps. So like the population of people globally who are responding to this don't have a clear picture of how many kids are there, like how many families are being separated, like what the true impact of the different levels of centers.
And that prevents us also from developing appropriate responses or interventions. And so I'm sure my colleagues can also speak to this in the Q&A, the difficulty of operating in closed environments. So some individuals, myself included, would say Ethiopia currently constitutes a closed environment, that there's a lot of information silence and crackdowns and all of this. And so but they should be able to give lots of examples from their work about operating in closed environments as well. So we'll definitely return to that question. The other thing that I wanted to raise was as an example of the types of data-driven work that's going on is USAID's INVEST program in Kandahar, Afghanistan. So USAID is the United States aid agency. It operates a kind of very broad range of programs. And so this is an incredibly narrow slice of the work of USAID. But the INVEST program is interesting because they actually allowed academics like me, actually someone that I worked for at Yale, to come and evaluate this program. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about it today. So INVEST has as of October 2019, which is the last press release I could find, had implemented activities in 14 countries. So this particular little sub-program of USAID was working in 14 different countries and had issued contracts valued at $8.5 million, according to USAID. The Kandahar, Afghanistan version of the program was implemented by one of the organizations in the Alliance for Peacebuilding, Mercy Corps, and they ran, and this is pulled from Mercy Corps' website, what was a 36-month-long skills development program in Kandahar province, designed to reintegrate Afghan youth, women, and IDPs into communities by expanding opportunities through enhanced vocation and life skills. And online, you can find a nice two-minute infographic video. I pulled this as a screenshot, right? Arguing that Afghanistan at this time was facing an unprecedented displacement crisis, which unfortunately has only gotten worse following the US withdrawal. And Mercy Corps was running this program using USAID money to try and change that, right? To try and build livelihoods in Afghanistan. As I mentioned, they allowed 3 researchers, one of whom, Jason Lyle, led Yale University's Political Violence Field Lab, who's now Dartmouth University, where they brought in these academics and said, okay, we want this data. We want a rigorous study to understand the impact of our program on our constituency, right? These individuals in Kandahar who are getting assistance from the US government. And so these academics came in and said, okay, we are going to design a randomized experiment with control, right? So this is something we do in medicine all the time, randomized control trials. Someone got a COVID vaccine, someone got a placebo. We're going to see who gets sick, right? Except in the political world, it looks a little different, right? So they took 2,600 youth in Kandahar province, and they divided them into 4 different groups. One group received 3 to 6 months of USAID-funded job and skills training. One group received a $75 cash transfer via cell phone, so they got texted mobile money that they could use. One group got both the jobs training and the $75, and a 4th group got nothing because they were the control group in the sample. So do you have any thoughts on concerns that you might have out of this design? What are some of your potential concerns in the back? Yeah, go ahead.
You're pitting people against each other automatically. Group number 4 is going to be upset with the other 3 groups.
If they find out, yeah, absolutely. If they find out that kind of everyone signed up for the same program and some folks got different things, that could lead to resentment, absolutely. What other concerns might you have?
What's the point of having the job or skills training if there's no jobs to be had in the province, or there's competition for those jobs?
Absolutely. So that's a global concern, not just in Afghanistan, but in many conflict-affected countries, that there's job scarcity. And so even though you might tool up, those jobs might not be there down the road. Yeah. Other thoughts? Okay. So, an academic peer-reviewed article was recently published on this titled, "Can Economic Assistance Shape Combatant Support in Wartime? Experimental Evidence from Afghanistan." So this is the academic version of this study. And what they found was that these different interventions here, these 4 different interventions, had different outcomes. And so that's really important for one, establishing an evidentiary baseline. It's also important for saying, okay, well, what should we do in the future? We know how this played out in Afghanistan. If we try similar programs in other countries, are we likely to get the same effects, right? So it's replicable in that sense also. So it meets these kind of standards of academic rigor. But what Lyle et al. Found is that there were some of these concerns that emerged in real life in Afghanistan. And so they found that training jobs training, skills training, it actually did make people's lives better economically. But if the point was that we were improving people's lives so they would stop supporting the Taliban and start supporting the allegedly democratic elected government of Afghanistan, well, it didn't do that part. So it did what it said it was going to do, to your point, which was improve economic livelihood a little bit. But one would argue that part of the reason why we fund these sorts of programmings is not only for their economic outcomes, but their political outcomes. And this program fell short on the political outcome. Okay, so then they turned to the cash transfer, right? And so if you think about it, like if you get a check from the government, if we all get a gas tax rebate or tax rebate, you're like, yes, I got some free money. And you're like happy about it. And you're like, I like the government. The government gave me some free money. But when that money runs out, how do you feel about the government then, right? And so what they found was that when these individuals received the $75, which in the context of Afghanistan was a significant income boost, right? It would be like if we got a $10,000 check out of nowhere, right? Then yeah, people actually were like, hey, the Afghan government's doing pretty well. But then that dissipated significantly. And actually, once the money ran out, support for the government was lower than before they received that money, right? Which is not necessarily a result that those who designed the study expected, right? But that's why it's important to study these systematically. And what they found is that, you know, those who received cash interventions ended up more likely to support the Taliban down the road than those who did not. So this is a case where a well-intentioned government-funded intervention actually worked at cross purposes with our political goals. And so I want to raise it to you as both evidence of the increasing adoption and importance of academic rigor and controlled experimentation and data collection, right? But also as an indicator that we're not all knowing, right? We don't know how our interventions necessarily are going to turn out. And that's why studying them is really important, but that's also why it's important to think through the ethics of intervention and to assess whether these interventions are important and necessary and their potential downsides as well. Yeah, so that's what I got. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Jessica. So I'm going to close it out. I'm going to also use PowerPoint since that's what we do. We're not going to use it as a project. And I'm going to give a case study as well about Colombia. And so this is just an example. It's but it brings up some of these questions, including questions that Jessica raised about difficulties of gathering data. Once you have the data, what does it really tell you? You know, these are things that we should all think about. It's also something I want to acknowledge that this is a project that I work on with students. So I have a couple RAs in the audience. So Luis was working with me on a different project, and Hellen Martinez here is works on this project. So I'm going to bring her up and speak in a little bit about the data gathering side of this work. So let me just open up my here my PowerPoint.
You have it pulled up already.
Do I? Let's see. No, it's not. Uh-oh, I didn't anticipate this happening. Drag this over to all right, well, I guess I will go without the PowerPoint. So this, let's see if I can at least, if I can pull up the, oh, you know what, sorry. Give me a second. I can.
I'll tell you what, while you're doing that,
Yeah.
let me say, I'll keep the crowd entertained and say
Well,
one.
maybe we can address this question about closed environments.
Well,
Yeah.
close environment, but you know what I was gonna say, is that livelihood program you were just talking about? I guarantee you that livelihood program is running in multiple countries
Yes,
right
right
now
now, yes.
still. And one of the things that, I'm gonna go back to the Global Fertility Act, it's about integration, integrating conflict into these programs. Because what we know, again, back to Mercy Corps, and I'll just disclose, my dear friend and old colleague of a couple decades is running all these programs at Mercy Corps, John Kurtz, and I always tell him, if we had John Kurtz in every one of our organizations, we would have this problem solved because he's brilliant at this. And that's one of the issues is that, you know, I'm a lawyer, we're programmers. It's like, those data people are coming again, right? We don't talk to each other. And that's why I hope in courses like this, you're actually doing some data. So I think you're ready. So
I'm ready.
stop.
Thank you very much.
So I'll stop keeping the crowd.
But I appreciate it. So this is a project about civil conflict in Colombia. So Colombia is, some of you who've taken my classes know in some measures, the longest running civil conflict in the world. The Colombian government acts like it's not still going on, but it's still going on. And so this comes out of some work that I done, and this I did as a so I did a little bit of work with the Organization of American States, which is kind of like the United Nations for the Western Hemisphere. And so this is inspired by some things that I observed. So there's something I think Jess can also talk about this. A lot of times you're inspired to dig into these questions by just seeing things. You wonder, is this thing that I'm seeing part of a broader pattern? And so the thing that I was there in 2016, and there was a big peace deal. And there was a peace deal between the government and the main rebel group called the FARC. And the people voted against the peace deal. And so this was a big shock to everyone. Incidentally, this happened in 2016. This was like a couple months before the US election. This was right around the time of Brexit too. So it's kind of like when this happened, I should have figured out that Trump's going to win. But you know, this is like the year of surprise election results, right? But it seemed to go against what everyone was expecting. I mean, everyone was saying you should vote for the peace deal. Like the US government, Colombian government was saying it, the US government, the United Nations, the Catholic Church, all the big institutions of the country were saying you should vote for the peace deal, and people voted against it by a narrow margin, but they still voted against it. This is a big mystery. Why did this happen? This is what I really want to dig into. So before we do this, I do have to give a little bit of historical background. So the conflict's going on since the 1960s. If you want to include the 10-year civil war called La Violencia that preceded it, even before that, but there were different armed actors. The main guerrilla groups are the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, on the left, which has at this point officially disbanded, officially converted into a political party, and the National Liberation Army on the right, the ELN, which is still officially at war with the Colombian government. This is a relatively low level, at this point, low-level civil war. The violence hit a peak between 1998 and 2002. These groups are not, and particularly ELN, which is still active, is not really in danger of overthrowing the Colombian government, but they're still doing attacks, still engaged in violent and criminal activities. Third party in this is paramilitaries. This was Carlos Castaño of the AUC, the United Auto Defense, Self-Defense Forces of Colombia. A lot of the dirtiest, a lot of the massacres, a lot of the most human rights violations were carried out by paramilitary groups. You see this as a pattern in a lot of places in the world in which kind of, you know, they're not officially working with the government, but they kind of are. And like, if the government doesn't want to, you know, anything the government doesn't want to do and have plausible deniability for, the paramilitary groups will do. And all of these groups engaged in criminal activities. Eventually, they all became heavily involved in drug trafficking and really any kind of illicit activity that was going on. If the profitable business in an area is illegal gold mining, they get involved in illegal mining. If it's the profitable business is cattle ranching, they get involved in cattle ranching, and they extort it. All these groups simply act as mafias. And this is at different points, but this is kind of the presence of these different armed actors. The violence got really bad, as I mentioned, at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s, and you know, reached the cities. It was something that for a long time could be ignored because it happened out in the countryside. A lot of people, especially in Bogota, felt like they were isolated from this. They're saying this is happening way off in the distance. And then they started getting attacks, including, civilian places, like, this was a discotheque down at the bottom. So take my class note. What does this picture at the bottom represent? What is it called? Donkey bomb, right? So this is a kind of a country version of car bomb that the FARC would use. I know it's very sad, but 200,000 people died in this conflict, so don't feel too bad about the donkey. There's also, other atrocities, child soldiers, kidnappings. Some people kidnapped. This Ingrid Betancourt, who's actually running for president right now. She was held captive for several years by the FARC, and she was at that time running for president with the Green Party. So they were not just targeting, the guerrilla groups were on the left, but they weren't just targeting politicians and whatnot on the right. Also capturing members of the armed forces, holding them for as long as sometimes 14 years in jungle prisons. So this, you can see kind of how this really turned the public against them. There were ongoing peace talks, and they eventually culminated in a deal in Havana. This is Raul Castro, the former president of Cuba, with Manuel Santos, the then president of Colombia, and Timochenko is his nom de guerre, the head of the FARC, who shook hands in this historic peace deal. This is a picture I took in Cartagena, where the treaty was ratified. They added a white stripe to the not official Colombian flag to represent peace. And in the run-up to the vote, everyone expected the peace deal to. So the government didn't really have to put the peace deal up to a vote, but they wanted to get public buy-in. They wanted to get the affirmation of the public that everyone is on board with this peace deal. So they did. They put it up to a referendum, a special vote. And all the polls ahead of the referendum showed that the yes vote, the C vote, was going to win by between 60 and 70%. And what actually happened is this. First of all, relatively few people voted at all. This was a special election. So this wasn't a regular year election. Most people just didn't bother to vote. The people who did, 49.8% voted yes, and 50.2% voted no. So it was, very, very close, but ultimately the no vote prevailed. This was some of the, the pictures in the news, the people who supported the yes vote, shocked. People who supported the no vote were exulting. So a lot of this this brought the question, like, why would people vote against peace? So actually, I want to throw it out to you, given some of you take my class, some of you did, but like, why would people vote against a peace deal? Anyone think of any ideas, any reasons? Yes.
I'll take a shot. Maybe they felt as though there would be no justice.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a major issue. That was one of many issues, but that was a very big issue. The sense of justice for victims. So a lot of people were victimized. Pretty much every family in Colombia was affected in some way, not just by the guerrillas, not just by the paramilitaries, not by the government, but in some way everyone was affected, and a lot of people felt like they were not being recognized, right? And they were not getting paid out. They were not being compensated, for the loss of their loved ones, for being displaced from their homes, all sorts of things that happened in the civil conflict, civil war. That's great. Any other ideas why people would vote against the peace deal? Yeah, Lawrence.
That's just bounce off that. It's more like low hanging fruit than I guess general disdain for when we know kind of them.
Yeah, so a lot of times special elections can be proxies for other political issues going on, right? So when they're hearing the government tell them, we support this peace deal, we worked out this peace deal, vote for this peace deal. If you don't like the government, you don't trust the government, you're probably going to vote against it just because you assume the government or the party that is power that you don't like is up to no good, right? So a lot of times these are proxies for partisan things. Any other ideas? Yeah, Carl.
Didn't you rebate suppose it?
Yeah.
When President East did that, diehard supporters will do whatever he says.
That's right. Yeah. So Carl showed my class, so he knows the politics of Colombia. Albert Uribe, the former president, kind of strongman, right-wing populist president who took a very hard line militarily against the guerrillas, and was also mixed up in the paramilitary groups himself. He was against the peace deal because he was very much about like, we need to defeat them, militarily on the battlefield. We don't negotiate with terrorists. He negotiates with terrorists too, but that's another story. Anyway, like if a lot of people love Uribe, so similar to Lawrence's point, it was about partisan politics. If people supported Uribe, supported his party, then they just kind of went along with whatever he said, right? So any other things that people might think? So anyway, these are good. These are all good things and good analyses. So this is what happened basically. So this is how the vote broke down geographically. The yes vote, you can't really see. So the yes is in this one it's green and no is red. The Bogota, which is a tiny little sliver, that voted green. So Bogota voted yes. A lot of areas kind of on the periphery voted yes, and a lot of these areas a little bit more in the interior, but not the capital, voted no. Now, I was in a part of Colombia that voted. I was in a couple of parts of Colombia that voted no. One was called Casanare, and the other one, excuse me, was called Tolima, which is actually where the FARC was born. It's a mountainous area, coffee growing area, and that's where like they, after the first civil war, they kind of ran away, they regrouped, they formed the FARC. And actually, here I'll just skip ahead here. This top thing is a rebel-controlled town, or until very recently, because the FARC had demobilized in before the peace deal, called Cajamarca, but they controlled this, and the people there would tell me, it's like they ran everything. It's like if you want to get divorced, you had to like get the permission of the FARC commander. They ran all the social services, they ran the courts. Essentially, there's no government presence in this. The nearest army base is very far away. Police forces, and there's a long history of just kind of vigilantism in Colombia, where it's like whoever has the most men with the most guns, and usually that's the largest landowner, the biggest cattle rancher would be the effective government. And then when it became guerrilla groups, or drug traffickers, whoever, they became the de facto government. A lot of people here, what they told me was, and this is there were flyers going up of paramilitary groups threatening people with death, saying they were going to come in and initiate what they called limpieza social, social cleansing, which essentially is a very localized mass killing of people who they didn't like. So there's definitely a climate of fear going on. There's people voting. It's me in my little jacket with away and stuff. But anyway, they voted no. And if you just talk to people on the street, and again, this is just anecdotes, and quantitative social sciences will say, the plural of anecdote is not data. Anecdote is just anecdote. It's just, like what a few people said. But what these people said was, first of all, we used to support the FARC. We lived in this town and they were the only government we knew. But then in the 90s, they started getting involved in drug trafficking because Medellin cartel got shut down, and then like the drug trade just kind of spread to a whole bunch of different actors around there. They started getting drug trafficking and other illegal business. They stopped seeing us as a base of support. They started seeing us as a source of revenue, basically. And they started extorting us. They started taxing us. They started stealing from us. They started forcing us out of our homes and using our homes to grow drugs or whatever. And they basically lost the support of the public. And basically, the people there said, we no longer, and actually the person who was the head of the no campaign in this town, her father was the FARC commander, so she was actually going against her own family. And she said, they basically they're not a political group, they're not really a guerrilla group, they're a mafia, they're a criminal organization. So why are we negotiating with a mafia? The government is saying they're negotiating with it's a political solution, but this is really a question for crime. So that's one person's attitude, and it's actually several people's attitudes. This is what I heard, and maybe they're being told that by me or other people, but a lot of people believe that, right? And I could see a lot of people there, they felt that, and that's what they talked about, this a region that's pretty remote. Is the people in the capital, the people in Bogota, they don't know what it's like to live through this. We are the ones living with this conflict all the time. They're living their high rises, they have government jobs, nice jobs, whatever. They're not affected by this. All those people who voted yes, they're people who have the luxury of voting yes because they were not affected by the conflict. That was the attitude there. That's actually not true. If you actually look at the violence statistics, the people who suffered the worst violence, so this area suffered violence, but a lot of it was relatively non-violent, more like mafia type stuff, extorting people. The massacres happened in these green areas, a lot of these places on the outskirts. Incidentally, also where most Afro-Colombians and indigenous Colombians live. So they were the worst, they were the victims of the worst violence, right? And a lot of this happened just where the fighting was going on between the guerrillas and the paramilitaries. So if you look at, this is some GIS data from a different data set here, but if you just look at the votes in the peace plebiscite, in this case, red is yes, blue is no. So yes, the big red dot in the middle is Bogota, that's the capital, right? Where relatively less violence happened. But a lot of the yeses you can see would match up. That previous vote happened in these outer lying areas, on the north coast and the west coast. And a lot of them, the size of the dot is population. So the smaller dots are relatively smaller, like villages, right? So rural areas. There were still a lot of rural areas where a lot of fighting took place that voted yes. And a lot of the blue, there are a lot of small blue dots, which would be rural areas that voted no. But there's also relatively bigger dots, like that main one is Medellin in the state of Antioquia, which is where leaving is powerful. And if you look at this, this is a kind of overall look at the impact of violence. The red is yes votes, so votes in favor, and the how dark it is the the intensity of the violence. A lot of the worst violence, people who were hit by the worst violence did vote yes. However, a lot of people who were hit by bad violence also voted no. So it doesn't actually very cleanly break out. Like neither side was, the people who voted yes would say those people who voted no, they're just like they're war, they're in favor of war, they don't like peace, whatever. No, like a lot of them do want peace because they did suffer through war, and a lot of people who voted yes also suffered through it. So this brings me to my problem, which is that there's no clear narrative here. People were affected by violence, or people were affected by the conflict, but they're affected in different ways. And there have been other people who've done this. I didn't do this, but have looked at different trend lines for how the violence affected different people. So some people were displaced, which is when an armed group comes in your community and just forces you out because they want your house, they want your property to traffic drugs or do whatever. So that's displacement. Generally, people who were displaced overall were more likely to vote yes. People who, this is gruesome, but had family members disappeared, never found their bodies, more likely to vote no. Victims of landmines, it's about, a lot of these are very, like kind of even regression lines. So it's not a very strong one way one way or another. So this is all to bring me up to so basically what I want to do is test this thing that the people I was hearing from, that I was talking to in these communities said, which is that, we were voting no because these people are not legitimate political actors. They're not really guerrillas. They're mafias. We don't want to, give political legitimacy to criminal groups. So it is my hypothesis essentially that if you lived in an area where the armed groups, guerrillas, the paramilitaries, whoever, committed more violent acts, committed more massacres, did more disappearances, you're probably more likely to vote yes in favor, because just self-preservation. But if you lived in areas like where I was, where there was a very heavy presence of armed groups, but they weren't as violent, but rather they were more criminal, where they engaged more in extortions and kidnappings for profit, things like that. I know kidnapping is violent, but they were primarily about making money off of you, then you're more likely to vote no. So that's what sparked this. And so I started collecting data. I started with one piece of data, and it was a very specific thing. I did a public records request, kind of like a FOIA request to the Colombian police. And the thing about Colombia, I do most of my research in Central America, and so I'm actually not that much of an expert in Colombia, but the next thing about Colombia is actually have really good data, better data than just about any other country in Latin America. So I started out with extortion, and I just asked them for what are some of your, here, let's see if I can, over, or actually I can.
It's the first one on the green, the one that I counted.
Yes, here we go. So extortions. So this was how many people reported being extorted by any armed actor in any given year in any municipality in Colombia. And this is, we have, so multiple years, 2003 to 2017. So the years before and the immediate year after the vote for the peace deal. And we have, 16,000 observations here, but multiple observations for every municipality. So I had Hellen build out this data set. I started with this, and first of all, we had to do counts by municipality, but then I wanted to collect a bunch of other indicators. I want to control for multiple things. So I'm actually going to bring Hellen up here. Hellen, would you mind coming up and sitting in the seat up here? Hellen was my MVP, my star research assistant, and she worked with me over the last year to build out this original data set based on data that no one has. First of all, the extortions no one has ever collected because I put out the request, but then no one has ever put these all together, and that's what Hellen did. So if you could talk a little bit about what you did.
Yeah, so just a little introduction. My name is Hellen Martinez. I'm a senior at VCU, studying political science and philosophy and law. I started working with Professor Paarlberg in August of last year, and the main part of my job was to follow this up all together. And this was provided by Colombia government, specifically provided by SEDE, which is el Centro de Estudios sobre Desarrollo Económico. In English, that's the Center for Studies on Economic Development. And they compiled all of this through primary sources such as the DAP, National Planning Department, DANE, National Administrative Department of Statistics, Ministry of Agriculture, Health, Mines and Energy, and a few others. So I basically started out with just the department, city, and the year. And
Department is a state.
yes. And I started out with just counting the number of extortions, and from then on, I'd go on in steps. We moved to calculating the percentage vote for the yes vote in the peace bill, going on to just general characteristics of each city and each department, compiling different violence and conflict factors, getting election data, and then lastly, the latitude and longitude of each city for Professor Paarlberg to make those little maps. And so I guess some of the challenges that I faced while doing this is that the data spreadsheets were all compiled into subcategories of health factors, education factors, violence and conflict, general characteristics, and each of those spreadsheets were all organized differently from the way I organized mine. So that took a lot of patience and having to fix them in order to match mine so I can easily just copy and paste the data onto my spreadsheet. But even then, there's still little inconsistencies that you have to be very careful about so that you don't end up messing up the entire spreadsheet. So yeah, that was one challenge. With this kind of work, you have to always double check and sometimes even triple check your work. So some of these steps took me up to 2 weeks, usually nothing more than that. And some of these spreadsheets had little data or just blanks. If you can scroll to like all of those political, like just zeros, blanks, or there's years that don't have data at all. There's nothing really you can do about that.
Yeah, if there's no data, you just leave it blank.
Yeah. So yeah, that's really all my work. The second part of my job is piling up a literature review, looking at, I think it's a list of 30 to 40 articles that help support his claim or are even against his claim. Yeah, that's my work, unless anyone has any other questions.
Yeah. So Helen has worked on this so this is a year's worth of work. So this is a huge project and it's a huge amount of help. I mean, this is something that it started with one public records request and then blew up, and the amount of data that I wanted to have because I want to control for all these things because all these things can also predict why people vote yes or no or vote for one party or another. Their demographics, their income, and all the other things that go along with the conflict in addition to extortions and violence. So I couldn't have done this without Helen. And this is, testament to, I think the great resources we have here at VCU, which is all of you primarily. It's, the students and just, people who are interested in these topics. I don't know, Helen, how much do you knew about the Columbia situation before starting on this?
I knew nothing.
Yeah, but you learned a lot.
I
Right?
did.
Yeah. Yeah, so thank you very much, Helen. I'm just going to end it there. This is still a work in progress. It's eventually going to turn into some kind of published article somewhere. But the academic publishing process is very slow. Maybe this is a way to segue back into this. We have the luxury of time, where we work on a single article for a couple of years, even. And if I had some elected official breathing down my neck, asking like, this is one of my questions, right? There's an election coming up this year in Columbia. What's the impact of this going to be on the election in Columbia? Well, I hope to find that out, but I'm definitely not going to publish this before the election, So this is not really going to, this is slow, deep bore research that is not necessarily helpful the way that, policy relevant, research is, for different audiences. So maybe we can end it there. Thank you very much, Helen.
But it can be helpful for the next conflict somewhere else.
Yeah,
So that's the important
that's the hope. Yeah.
Also, the Columbia Agreement would make
about reconciliation, causes. It was shocking for all of us to see that it goes down.
Most peace agreements fail within the first 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
And so Colombia is at that point right now. So we at the State Department are watching this very closely. We have a number of programs that look or monitor the implementation rate of the peace accord. And it's about 15% of the stipulations of the Colombian peace accord that have not been implemented at all. But the pace of implementation has not completely dropped off or declined. It's continuing to move forward, even though some various communities thought that it might not have during this last Colombian administration. So it's important to continue to keep a lot of this research going, that it's not just you sign a piece of paper. It's really, again, it's the implementation of some of the hardest, most difficult pieces.
And again, one of the most comprehensive peace agreements that's been done. That's a lot harder than, disarm or.
Yeah, and also to go into misinformation, most voters didn't read the full text of the
Yeah,
peace
of
agreement, and you
course.
can't expect them to. But this is where misinformation came in. And there are a lot of people who were campaigning for partisan reasons, not really about the peace agreement itself, but because they didn't like the party that was in power, that were saying things that were in this peace agreement that were not. Look, let's just be blunt. There's a lot of homophobia in Colombia, and there was a story that one parts of the peace deal was to legalize same-sex marriage. A lot of people were against that, and they voted against the peace deal, believing that was true. It was not true. There was nothing in the peace deal about that. So you can have as good of a peace deal as you want, but if it's really detailed, really long, and no one reads it, what are people going to do? So, that's our panel presentation. We wanted to open this up to have a discussion and include questions from all of you. So I wonder if anyone has any questions right off the bat. If not, we can also start a kind of discussion, and then if this inspires any other questions, we can turn it over. So does anyone have any questions they want to begin with? Yeah, Carter.
So the peace deal was voted against, but they still implemented it?
Yeah, the government just rammed it through Congress anyway. Yes. But, it's not working that well. There's still a lot of violence. There are still parts of the FARC that did refuse to disarm, and they call themselves dissidents FARC, and they're still doing pretty much the same thing. A lot of those paramilitary groups, they just changed their names. They have colorful names like Black Eagles or the Urabeños. So there's a lot of this kind of semantic sleight of hand where the government says, well, there's no more paramilitaries. Well, there are, they just don't have the same names. And they just kind of name anyone who's still doing the same thing, BACRIM, bandas criminales, criminal gangs, as if this is now a criminal problem, but it's literally the same people with the same guns operating in the same area doing the same things. Any other thoughts about, and for big picture questions about?
Yeah, anything.
Yeah.
You can ask policy questions.
This is for review, and I don't know how relevant it is either, but has there been any research in, or anything that you guys have done in assessing pop culture trends in terms of music, topics that are being produced in popular music at the time that have to do with any of the metrics that you're using?
I'll start off. And so one of the especially in the peace building field, there's been a number of programs that are focused on how can we use culture, theater shows, or peace messaging, radio messaging, things like that. And as far as I know, the data on a lot of the effectiveness of those programs is inconclusive. U.S. Institute of Peace did one particularly focused around peace messaging, and found that surprisingly, just sending out positive messages of peace wasn't as effective as that we thought it would have been. So I think specifically on pop culture, I don't think that I have seen anything particularly on that, but on some of these other types of programs internationally, like theater, road shows, using music and then peace messaging, it's sort of inconclusive. And I think that part of it is what Liz and others were talking about. There's just not a lot of data.
Yeah.
We haven't done a good job of building from the very beginning the baseline data, that initial, before you start an intervention, thinking through how are we going to measure that? And then not just doing the bare minimum, but trying to almost set ourselves up for stress testing our strategy or our program. And that's some of the stuff that we are doing through this new landmark legislation and the Global Fragility Act is looking at countries around the world to see how can we do this better. I call it layering of metrics, where before, like in Afghanistan, there was the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction put out a report on the 20 years of Afghanistan, and it's important. It's such an important piece. We actually brought them into the State Department and said everyone needs to hear about this. And one of the lines that really stuck with me is that we did a lot of really good projects and implemented them well, but they didn't amount to strategic impact. And so I think that's our challenge with this new initiative, is that we can't just have a whole lot of programs that did a lot of good things if they don't actually add up to some strategic impact. So on pop culture, I think we need more data, and the few things I've seen, it's not been inconclusive.
So one thing, there is some research at George Mason at the Carter School there, and there's some research on pop culture of the 60s and music in the United States. I don't know much about it. I just know somebody is doing research there on that, or has done some research on it. But how do you get things into pop culture, right? And a lot of it has been through TV shows and radio programming. And we have seen that that has had impact. The one time, and I've funded these programs, is that when we bring people together to talk about it, and there's one or two people there that are like, oh no, that's stupid. It changes the whole dynamic of, because you're like, oh, well, I can think like that too. And so that's one of the things. So, we funded these radio programs, and then we're like, oh, we'll do these listening groups. The listening groups are actually problematic. And, but there's lots of, we have like the football team program where, we have different ethnicities working together. And so there is a lot of pop culture.
Yeah, there's actually an entire unit at the State Department, the Global Engagement Center, that focuses, it's been shifted to focus a lot on misinformation and disinformation. Yeah. But the Global Engagement Center and also some units at USAID have focused a lot on social media in particular. And so we've done a lot of training designed to create and cultivate social media influencers, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where essentially because of kind of the cellular technology impetus, right? Anyone with a smartphone has access to the internet in a way that they don't necessarily have a hardwired connection at home. And so a lot of that programming has been targeted at youth to create social media influencers, in particular to promote messages of peace and tolerance. And there's also been an effort to create, in particular, soap opera programming that shows, for instance, multi-ethnic couples, right? As a way of saying, we can model this on TV, just in a way that interracial couples on US television weren't seen for decades, right? We're trying to create those sorts of dynamics in other countries as well.
And here.
And yeah,
there's a lot of stuff that happens out in Hollywood that actually was one of the big SUV programs, or the SUV program, when they talked about the rape kits.
Special victims unit.
Special victim
Yeah,
unit. That was actually placed in there to have a discussion about the rape kits that were not. USC and UCLA does a lot of this work to talk about that rape kits are sitting in storage and not tested. What happened after that? Legislation, the funding came out, and it was just a conversation between the two detectives.
And then the most significant example really is the US State Department's support for foreign editions of Sesame Street. So we have Shalom Sesame in Israel, we have versions of Sesame Street in India, in South Africa, right, that focus on kind of multilingual, multi-religious programming as well. And so it's happening through a variety of different US government agencies and operating at a variety of levels, but it is very much acknowledged that the most significant area of impact can actually be through these soft approaches.
I was just mentioning it because I've been trying to research Tamashek music and looking at during different points of the Tuareg rebellions, how the content of the music that they produced changed, and the peace messaging versus a rally for support in terms of war, if like using the messaging from those songs that were produced could elicit any sort of reaction, like telling us, oh, there may be conflict, like at this time, or like the production of the literature and the music that's being produced at this time is really showing that there's more of like a cohesive effort for peace.
So look at the United States in the 60s.
Yeah,
That's the data that
yeah.
they're looking at.
But
And you're absolutely right. So this is something that we're working on, is how can you basically, there's a lot of data, how do I call it, amalgamation of programs, or basically it can scrub social media and allow you to use search terms to then map out trends over time. One of the commercial products is called GeoSpark. And it was actually a former State Department person that helped work on this. And we're starting to use that in different places to look at trend lines to conduct early warning. So where do we see increases in hate speech in countries around the world? And can we start to see upticks? Okay, what do we do then thereafter? So I think you're spot on. This is kind of new in the field. And so you should come work at State.
Yeah.
But and another thing, sorry, just to jump off that,
Yeah.
a lot of this stuff is public and therefore freely accessible. So, some teach research methods. I teach in political science department, but there are other departments that teach, different uses of computers. I teach a software program called R, or a coding language called R, and a software program called RStudio. And you can use this to scrape websites, scrape Twitter, scrape Reddit. And so you can look for things, so incidences of hate speech. You can do that yourself. And there are a lot of people who are just hobbyists, amateur computer programmers, as well as people working in government and NGOs who just look. If you remember, there was a trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, and there was this rumor that she had like a secret Reddit account. So I just looked up that Reddit account, and I just scraped all the things that came out of that Reddit account for like a few years. I didn't see anything particularly notable, but you can do this with completely free software and a few YouTube tutorials.
I will say that some of the limitations with this approach can be specifically mentioned for it, and I think it's really important that the State Department and Facebook and all these other platforms are not designed to deal with what we would consider micro languages or dialects. So a big issue with Facebook's accountability for atrocity prevention in places like Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and Myanmar was that Facebook basically said well, we don't have people who speak those languages, so we're not monitoring this stuff, because you can't expect us to go out and find these minority language speakers. And it's come on, your Facebook, you can certainly find these people, and you can certainly program into this. And so I think there was a lot of pushback on that, but I raised this just because a lot of this content, if it's not in standard Arabic, forget it, right? And so we need to build that capacity, that human capacity within our systems to not just follow Amharic messaging, but to build out minority language expertise as well.
This is where machine learning comes in. And so GeoSpark, that's why I mentioned it, is one of the groups that we've discussed with, because they've used machine learning to build in hundreds of different languages, different dialects, in order to immediately translate from social media, from news articles, from a number of sources. And they also utilize test case sort of to stress test, is their system working? But I think you're absolutely right. We can't just focus on our narrow sort of lens of what we're familiar with. So absolutely.
And can I just say, that's actually a really good point, because who designs a lot of these programs?
Yeah.
Someone like me, someone like you. Our brains aren't on conflict. And this is, I'm actually just talking about the neuroscience. We know about this much about conflict. I mean, not about our brain. So I'm designing a program that would work on me. It makes perfect sense. But someone's brain is completely rewired because of conflict. And we know this from the MRIs of women who have been abused, domestic abuser survivors. Their MRIs have done it, and their brains look differently. So that's also a really important point. And one of the big parts about global fragility, because we're talking about all this data, so what do we do with it? What do we do? And when we go and design programs, we have to be making sure that we're working with people in those communities that say this is stupid.
Yeah, how do you do that in places like, or like, and get involved with, let's say, people that are living in like PLO or like Hamas controlled areas, for example?
There's another issue.
How would other governments do it? No, I mean, I think at any of these difficult to reach places, I think trying to obtain diverse perspectives is so important. And I think a lot of the conversations we're having now is, we have a tendency, we have so many requirements in the US government, for example, for if you get a grant from the US government, there's a whole lot of paperwork that comes with it. And so when we go and we give out, local organization grants, they're pretty professional. These organizations know how to apply for US government funding or international funding. They know how to follow the regulations, those kind of things. So the reason why that's important to know is that they're professional. They're borderline elite groups. So we have to, in the international community, has to recognize that we're only talking to a certain portion of the population. We need to widen our audience. We need to reach out to a wide variety of people. And so you can do that in a lot of different ways, focus groups, just hosting roundtable conversations, just getting out of the capital or whatever major city, going to the rural areas. So it's all data.
For you guys.
It's very hard for
Because of the
us.
security
Yeah.
reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. So in some of these places, it's very difficult, but especially for the US government, but that's where we bring in academic perspective, local perspective, using alternative sources of information than perhaps we have before. And that, I think, is where, when I think about improving the strategies, I've worked on assistance for over 16 years for the US government in lots of different places and lots of different accounts. And the number one thing that I think about is exactly this point, how myopic, how colonialist we sound by saying, here's your problem and here's the solution and we're going to fund it. We need to flip the script. We need to go talk to people and hear what they think, because sometimes the problems that we prescribe are not really a problem. It's just something that we're focused on.
And that's the Alliance for Peacebuilding, over 160 organizations working in 181 countries. And they can. So the Mercy Corps, and the Search for Common Grounds, and the Catholic Relief Service, they're working out and they go far and wide and have local experts working for them. And so that's how a lot of this information comes in as well.
And to bring it a little bit outside of policy too, so one recommendation if you're interested in kind of like biases within tech is there's a Netflix documentary called Coded Bias, and it starts with an MIT computer scientist, PhD student who's African American. She realized that facial recognition software doesn't work on her. Yeah. Why? Because the training sets were all with white people. And this is very common in the tech world. Like that you can have a sophisticated algorithm. You can have sophisticated machine learning techniques, but if you're testing, if you're testing it on a population that is not representative, like it's not going to be good. And this can have very dangerous implications. We've seen this with skin cancer research, where a lot of the testing, the tests were only done with people with light complexion, and so it's missing a lot. These algorithms were missing a lot of evidence of skin cancer in other people. So this is why having representation in in tech, in any kind of research, quantitative research, is extremely important.
And also, who also dominates the tech community?
Right. Yeah.
Men. So women, a lot of this is designed by men and tested on men. So that's why it's also women.
Yeah. Any other questions for the audience? This is great. Let's just let me give what. Anyone else have any questions before we go back?
Be bold, don't be afraid. Friendly, yes, please, there we go.
Have any of you ever become disheartened to the point where you thought, why am I doing any of this? Well, you're shaking your head.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, when I was in Ethiopia, this was a government that the EPRDF, while they were building roads and, they were putting health extension workers in every community and putting people in school. This was a government that was dominated by 10% of the population who, people I had known had to leave, were exiled. People were put in prison. So sometimes you're like, why am I doing this? And you can't actually get to the heart of it because this is a government that wants things to be kept out. So you're like, just like chipping, like, is it worth it? Are we, should we even be here? Sometimes people in Ethiopia would say, just leave. If you would just leave, then you're propping up this government. I'll give you Uganda as an example. Somebody from the government called me and asked me, somebody in the White House called me to ask me to actually get this out, to write about it. In Uganda, the elections, they just had them a couple months ago. People put in jail, opposition, crackdown. Guess what the US government does? We give more money in terms of security sector to their military than any other country. So if you're in Uganda, you're like, no, I don't understand what's happening. Why? And so that, it can be disheartening. It really can. I mean, the Global Fragility Act, I've spent 6 years of my life working on this, right? It's taken, we finally got the countries to come out, but, I'm not 100% it's going to get implemented robustly. And we know this is what we should be doing. So there is a lot of heartbreak.
Yeah, I mean, so many examples. Central America, I helped build the US strategy for Central America from 2008 to 2013. And after I left, seeing it effectively start to fall apart, we made huge progress. In a year. One of my programs decreased homicide rates by 75%. We had kids going back to school that previously had to pay a quetzale in Guatemala in order to, basically a bribe to the gang members to go to school. And we're talking about, second, third graders. And we're making huge progress, and suddenly that got rolled back. Afghanistan. I was served in Afghanistan from 2014 to 2015. Then I was the chief of staff for the special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. I think there, from a policy perspective, with all that's happened since, and I was the deputy for the Afghan task force trying to help Afghans at risk and getting those phone calls. Those are the moments that you really question, could I have done more? Could I have done better? Could I have, does it really matter? At the end, we have two options. You can say, it doesn't matter, we shouldn't be doing anything, we should just pack up and leave and be part of the problem, or you can be part of the solution. And that's what I keep going back to, is we have to do better. And that's like where I started the talk today, right? That's why I love the work that I'm doing now, is because we're trying to do better, and that's what we constantly have to do. We have to keep evolving and not have the hubris that we've already got it done. We're the best, we can't learn anything else. So yeah, we make mistakes. I don't think you hear that enough from the US government, especially the State Department, but we make mistakes and we need to learn from them.
So that was the bad and also the good. Would you both say that the good will keep you coming back, punching back in day with day, is the belief that you can make a change?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the other option? I think about my husband and I talk about, we should just like buy a house out in the country and start a smoothie making place, right? But like, I can't do
Mine's a
that.
bakery.
Right. Right, we all have that. And I can't imagine not, right? Because we know, like, we have the tools and the resources, the funding compared to DOD is just off the charts. We had just a little bit of that funding. We could make huge differences. And so, I don't know how you don't, but we all have these fantasies. So.
But I also think like people who are drawn to study conflict or political violence, right? It's not everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
Not everyone wakes up and says, you know, I'm going to spend 8 to 10 hours of my life looking at conflict and violence. So I also think that the wonderful thing about being part of this community is kind of sharing these goals and these interests with other individuals who see the importance of these issues. And so we may come at it from very different personal motivations, right? Like my mom fled martial law in her home country and wanted to live in a free and democratic society. And I am blessed, we're all blessed to live in a flawed but free society. And so, you know, when we look at other societies and other contexts where people don't have those rights and freedoms, right, you really feel like, you know, despite the challenges that America faces, like we have so many blessings. And the, you know, the ability to kind of try and further that and try and help others live with those freedoms. You know, I think it is a shared goal for many people in this community, you know, irrespective of political or social or other beliefs. And so it's nice to have a kind of unified objective that is kind of betterment.
And I will say it's you have to hold on to those anecdotal, sure, but those real moments, you know, and that's what I think about, like about the positive, that life-saving opportunities. It really is life-saving. Like example, at this we knew we predicted that Russia was going to invade Ukraine, and my program in Ukraine, we were ready. We had already pre-staged an adjusted program funding, so that way, if they needed emergency assistance, they could reuse some of the resources. And one of our it's a veterans program, so it was intended to reintegrate Ukrainian war combat veterans into society. And we pivoted the program at the start of the war. And one of their hubs, the veteran hub, was bombed by the Russians at the Kiev TV tower. Fortunately, no one in our program died, but there were civilians in the street that died as a result. And in that hub, it became effectively not just a hub for the veterans, it became the local bomb shelter, became the waypoint for individuals fleeing eastern Ukraine and from Kiev to get to that location to then get on to the west and onward. And it's those kind of stories of life-saving assistance that kind of keeps you going, that, okay, yeah, I got to deal with the auditors and the bureaucracy, the paperwork, but that's the kind of stuff that makes it real.
And also your Percy program, all of, you know, we learned so much from that. And the work in Central America and the Northern Triangle that you were working on, it's back. Yeah. Because the reason why it got shut down is because we had a change of government. And, you know, saying we're going to punish those governments for sending those people. Well, that was the exact opposite thing to do, right? You don't, and we wrote, the Alliance for Peacebuilding was very vocal about that. Like, that's the opposite of what you should be doing. But you know what President Biden did on pretty much day one? Put the the Northern Triangle strategy back in place to address the drivers of conflict in those three countries. And I always say, it is actually the Global Fragility Act, just, you know, this integrated approach down there. So, you know, it comes back around. And I think that that's an important piece. Also with Ukraine, we've learned so much on mis and disinformation. We didn't know what to do because Russia lies. Well, we're not going to lie. But you know what we have found through this? The truth. And that we can actually put some intel out there. And, you know, here this is gonna be a false flag. We know what they're gonna do. They're gonna, you know, and that is, it's like we found a tool, right? The truth.
Yeah. This is the first time that the intelligence community has released this amount of intelligence publicly
before it happened.
Before it happened. Yeah.
And that is like bravo. When I was like, that's brilliant that the US government's doing it. And now we know.
So just we have this room until 12, so we have 9 minutes left. I think we have time for another question, definitely, but just before anyone leaves, so we have a second event today, 2 p.m. at Rams Lounge in the Student Commons, which will be a very much more casual meet and greet conversation. And anyone who is especially interested in careers, again, and just in international policy generally, it doesn't have to be with the US government, but if you're interested in the State Department, interested in civil society, anything involved with that, please come. Student Commons, Rams Lounge, 2 p.m. Okay. Any last questions? Yes, go ahead.
How do you balance trying to deal with like issues of problems when the population is normal to their culture doesn't really see those things as problems? Like, how do you balance that with your own values?
So we have a approach called the do no harm approach, where we want to avoid impressing upon countries things that are may cause more challenges, may cause violent conflict and those kind of things. But at the same time, we have to stand up for our values and have those debates. And so I think again, you use the word, it's a balance. It's a balancing act. It's every time we have these kind of conversations of how can we ensure that we're promoting our democratic values, but at the same time not just enforcing or overlaying those on every society in an equal way, where it may cause adverse reactions. We have to balance it and think through those various aspects. But at the same time, we have to have some tough conversations and be able to have those tough conversations with our allies and partners or other countries we deal with around the world. And that's what we're doing now. I think especially in this administration, you're seeing the president, the secretary of state, the vice president, being willing to have really tough conversations with countries when especially around human rights issues, when we see that human rights abuses are taking place. So I think that's important, but we also have to make sure that we're balancing out the approach that certain topics that we're not just enforcing our solution
and living our values. Yeah. Because part of the problem is, President Biden has said our domestic policy and our international policy can't be, split. And so I think that that's a really big part of it that we struggle with as well. It's, we're talking about doing things somewhere where we're not doing them in our own country. And so if you're interested also in conflict prevention in this work, I tell people you don't have to work internationally. You can actually work here in the United States. There's a lot of work going on now in the US. But one really important piece of that, and this is one of the things people in my field have really been dealing with, wanting to work on social justice issues. And I also explained those are really, really important. But there's a lot of different conflict dynamics in the United States. And just because my values, I don't want to go and work on these issues, you have to as well, because otherwise you're not addressing the conflict dynamics in the country. And so that's also a big part of it, is that you have to think of it as a system, a complex system, and work with people and address things that goes against your own values.
Well, I think we got another class waiting to come in. So why don't we close it out now? Thank you very much to our guests. They will be at the meet and greet at 2 p.m. So please come to that if you're interested.
thank you. Thank you.